Greetings. I wanted to make a video to tell you a little bit more about my expectations for the classroom management poster sessions that we'll be working on this semester. I always start these videos by saying, I am not a videographer, I am not an actress. Today I'm actually making this from my home, so you could hear a dog bark, you could see a cat jump in my way. So please know that this isn't intended to be a professional quality video, but it is intended to provide you with a little bit of additional information as you approach this project. One of the things I want you to be sure that you do, and you can see I have our Blackboard page up in front of me, this project is actually part of what the work you will do in Unit 2. And so when you look at Unit 2, one of the things I want you to make sure of is that you've read the information that has been assigned prior to really engaging and working on your project, so that what you do is reflective of what our books and other resources are recommending. Also, if you scroll down to the bottom, there are some additional resources here, and I want you to feel free to utilize those as you're working on your project. There's a template for designing classroom instruction. There are also some additional resources there, iris modules, etc., that may be helpful to you as you engage in this project. And then what I'd like you to do is go through, I'm going to open the area of Blackboard that's specifically dedicated to this project, and I'm going to download the guidelines so that we can review those together, and I can provide you with just a little bit more information. And I will look at my downloads and click on that. It takes it a minute sometime. Okay, so the idea of this project is to have you work with your peers and to design an effective and supportive environment for all students. So that means that we put in place universal supports that we've talked about so that all students in our class know what the expectations are, a system of reinforcement and consequence will be for students who engage in appropriate behaviors and for those who engage in inappropriate behaviors, and so that, kids know what to expect. Then I also want you to be thinking about a student who would have some behavior support needs that might be better addressed at tiers 2 and 3. So they're still going to receive and be well aware of those universal systems that are in place, but this is going to be a child that needs something else in addition to that. And then you're going to, like I said, design your classroom, share it with others. Usually this is an activity that students really enjoy. The first thing you need to decide is what kind of classroom are you designing. So I don't care if it's elementary, middle, high school. I don't care if it's an inclusive setting, a self-contained classroom for kids with disabilities, although I certainly discourage those. It can be a high school art class. It can be, a first grade classroom. Really doesn't matter, but you need to tell, your peers and myself, what environment are you working on? What are the ages of the kids that are going to be served there? What subjects are being taught, etc. Then I want you to be able, I mentioned the cat, I think you just heard him. I mentioned that I want you to just have a student in mind that you're thinking about who's going to need some additional supports. And so you need to supply basic demographic information about that student. We want to know what their age is, their grade, their race, ethnicity, their language status. And when you say, sometimes students have a tendency to do one or two things related to language status. They may say the student is an English speaker. Well, that's great, but someone can also be an English learner and speak English. So I want you to say, does this student speak English only? Does this student speak English and another language or additional languages? Are they qualified to receive instruction from bilingual or English as a second language educators? That level of information. Also, unless you are giving a fluency measure or have access to one, remember that you're not qualified to say whether that person is fluent or not. You're just able to describe what languages do they speak and what kind of supports do they get. And then I want you to really think about what are the strengths that student has. And here I'm specifically, you can include academic strengths, but we're focusing on behavior. So what are their behavioral strengths? All students have them. And again, it's by knowing students' strengths that we can build on those and better address their needs. So you need a description of strengths and also a description of needs or areas that you have targeted for improvement. You're going to do a pictorial representation of the classroom. You can either do that by having pictures or using one of the templates provided to talk about how that space is going to be arranged. And remember that you need to clearly think about what are your instructional goals and has the classroom been arranged in a way that will support those goals. So I always think it's interesting when teachers want a lot of group work, but kids are all on individual desks. Or alternatively, they're wanting kids to do things primarily on their own, but they have them seated in clusters of 4. So you need to think about what are the students going to be doing, what are the majority of my activities going to be involved, and how is this instructional environment going to support that, okay? You're going to think about things like where are supplies going to be kept, where's the trash can, where's the pencil sharpener, all those things that if we don't think about them up front can actually cause difficulties for us as we're trying to manage the classroom environment and also capitalize on our instructional and use our instructional time wisely. You're going to have a list of classroom rules and expectations, and I want you to think about the fact that your text talks about limiting the number of rules. You don't want a list of 27, right? 3 to 5 is usually a good rule of thumb for overall rules that you're going to have or defined expectations. Those should be stated positively. We should spend our time telling children what we do want them to do rather than what we don't want them to do. So I always say describe the appropriate behavior. Do not say don't do. I actually have talked off and on in classes about this. When I was a young kid, somebody once said to me, an adult, don't ever put a bobby pin in a light socket. Now I have to tell you, I don't think I would have ever thought to put a bobby pin in a light socket, but when it was said to me by an adult as don't do that, I spent a lot of time actually thinking about it and thinking about why they would tell me not to. So remember, we describe what we want, not what we don't want when we establish those rules. And then you need a plan for making sure that kids have an opportunity to learn what those rules mean. And that is beyond I'm going to read them to them. So kids need to really know. I gave the example, or I often give the example in class, that it's real common to walk in and see respect yourselves and others as a general classroom rule. Well, that can mean a lot of different things to different people in different contexts. So you need to have a way of making sure that children understand, what does respect look like here? What specifically am I looking for? What's an example? What's a non-example? And making sure that students actually have an opportunity to process that. We sort of often assume that children, have an understanding of this terminology that they may not, or that may not be part of their behavioral experiences either in their homes or in their communities. Respect may look very different, and appropriately so, than it does in your classroom. I want you a continuum of techniques for acknowledging appropriate behavior. So what are all the ways that you are going to let students know when they're doing the things that you want them to do? And, that goes from just, things that we probably commonly do every day, verbal praise, that sort of thing, to some, it may be that you use some more concrete and specific sorts of techniques for students who accomplish larger goals or objectives that you have related to behavior. I also want you to remember that it's really important that students receive what we call task-specific praise, so that when you're praising them, you're letting them know what it is they did well. Often you go in a classroom, I do this too, you did a great job, you did a good job. Of what? Sometimes kids need really specific information to know, oh, this is what she's looking for, and that's, or he, excuse my gender bias, or he's looking for, and that's what I need to do again, okay? The same will be true for responding to inappropriate behavior. So you're going to have a continuum of techniques. What are you going to do when it's something very minor and you just want to redirect that child and get them back on task, or that student? And what are you going to do when there's some sort of major disruption or difficulty? Okay. I want you to describe basic procedures that students will follow throughout the day. And you all know this, you've all been in classrooms. It is real important to think about, what are we going to be doing? When are we going to be moving? What's going to be the way that I need to structure that movement so that I minimize the amount of instructional time that I lose? How am I going to distribute and collect materials? When are children going to be allowed to use the restroom, get a drink of water, sharpen their pencil? All those kinds of things. And that will vary depending upon the kind of instructional environment that you choose to create, right? You know, is it a 1 hour academic subject in a high school, or is this a classroom where students are going to spend a majority of the day? And then the last section is a description of the unique supports that you're going to provide your target student and a mechanism for collecting data on the effectiveness of those particular supports. So not only do I want you to say what you're going to provide for that student, but I also want you to have a means of determining whether or not what you're providing is indeed resulting in what you're wanting to accomplish. So I'm going to expect a chart at a minimum that's going to detail how you're going to track the effectiveness of what you're doing, okay? Your posters need to be attractive. They need to be professional. I'm hoping that most of you have had an opportunity to attend a professional conference and go to what's called a poster session, where usually participants walk from poster to poster, and the session, the people presenting that poster have an opportunity to discuss it. But one of the things that's true about a poster is it's not, 45 PowerPoint slides with 18-point font. So you're going to have to think about how to be succinct, how to convey a lot of information visually and with a limited amount of space. Now that said, I don't care if for your poster you can do it like a trifold board, put your poster up. You can do a PowerPoint with several slides or a Prezi, but you are going to need to think about really being able to succinctly capture what you're doing, because as I said, this is a short presentation, some visual supports, not a very lengthy and incredibly detailed presentation. If you have questions about that, I certainly want you to ask. I'm going to shut this down because I also want you to go through and look at the rubric. So I'm going to open this up and ask you to view it. There are 80 total points available for this project. 70 of those will come from the presentation that you do in class. So you'll notice in terms of poster content, if you looked back, there were 8 questions that you were going to respond to related to those guidelines, and you get 7 points for each of those questions, okay? So essentially 7 points per question. Please make sure that you respond to all the questions. Sometimes students actually lose points on projects like this because they just didn't address something. Well, if I'm giving you, points for addressing something and you don't address it, I have no choice but to not give you any points for that section. You'll get an additional 14 points for the quality of your presentation. How effective are the materials you bring? How well do you communicate? Do all the people in your group exhibit some skills associated with that communication, confidence, enthusiasm, eloquence? When your group is presented with questions, do you answer them well? All of that will factor in to that presentation grade. And then the other 10 points that you have the potential to earn for this project come from a self-peer evaluation, self-peer collaboration evaluation. So I'm going to download that and we'll take a look at it together. Okay. Took me a minute to find it there, and it'll take probably just a second for it to download. There are 10 total points available for this part of the project. If you do not submit one, even if your peers say you deserve all the credit, you are going to get a 0 on this portion. So make sure that you respond and upload your presentation accordingly. You're going to put your name, you're going to put the focus of your presentation. That shouldn't say family, I'll change that. You're going to name yourself, the other members of your group. You have 100 points to distribute, and you're going to distribute that amongst both yourself and the other folks that you worked with. If there are particularly high or particularly low allocations of those points, then you need to provide some examples that justify the scores that you gave. And I will take that together with, your potential 70 points that you could earn from your poster presentation, 10 potential points from this. Combined, that makes a total of 80 points that are available for the course. Please let me know if you have any questions about this. I appreciate you working well together and doing the best job that you can on your poster project.